Welcome to the StarPodLog comic scene with your hosts, Jeff and Tony.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wiley.
And I'm Tony Barletta.
And we're here to discuss the impact of the coronavirus and COVID-19 on the comic book industry for StarPodLog.
Thanks for having us today.
All right, so it's probably worth noting that we are recording this on May 23rd, and as of a few days ago, comics began shipping again out to comic book shops for the first time in about 2 months.
Diamond did, but DC was doing it on their own for a few weeks to shops that opted in. But this is the first week that more than just DC went, and the first time Diamond actually got into it again.
Right.
But also clarifying, Marvel won't start until next week.
That's right. So there's already been some negative impact on the comic book industry. We've already seen a few, probably more than a few, comic book shops close their doors forever. Just in the weeks where the pandemic began in the United States. Comic book shipments came to a screeching halt. Creators got a pencils down order, and for the listeners that may not know what a pencils down order is, that is when a publisher tells the comic book creators to literally stop creating.
And then too, I mean, if a particular creator wasn't told to stop production, just keep producing art, keep producing story, it's good for the short term, but once everything opens up, the comic book companies aren't going to put 3 months worth of product out at one time. So even if they haven't stopped, they're going to have to at some point in the future just to keep up.
Right. So some of the retailers I've talked to told me that the publishers are going to kind of slowly trickle product back in so that shops aren't overwhelmed.
It's a great idea.
Let me pose this question to you. This pandemic was a potential opportunity for digital comics to take a bigger share of the market. But from what I've observed and the chatter that I've read online, that really this was a missed opportunity, or do you think what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on digital comics not taking a step forward during the pandemic?
Well, I mean, the comic book industry, when you look at comic book fans, it's a wide group of people. That's still a small group of the population. But comic book fans encompass fans of decades past that might not buy many new comics, but maybe they go in sporadically and buy some off the shelf once in a while. It also is people that just got into comics recently within the last decade or two, and they have their titles they like every week. But when you look at digital comics, I would say that it's a finite group of people in that within that group of comic book fans. And I don't think the comic book industry as a whole ever really did appeal to that whole group of people at one time. I think that's always been the problem. Maybe it's the fact that the product costs too much. Maybe it's the fact there's too much coming out at once, that people couldn't find the books they're looking for. When people say that, they didn't really like new comics anymore, I think it's just a problem that they couldn't find them because there's so much product out there, but there's tons of different kinds of products than ever before. But, the thing is with digital only really appeals to a small group within the comic book fan community. I myself don't like digital comics. I would never buy a digital comic. If print comics went away, that would be it. I wouldn't. I just don't have any desire to read the product on a digital means. And I think there's many people out there that feel the same way. So I think, but there are fans out there that love digital, and they love them more than print, and they want to sell all their print or give them away and never see a print comic and only have digital. And those fans exist too. But I think those fans are a small portion of comic book fans, and I don't think you could have the future of the industry rest on that small group of people. I don't think it would sustain itself.
I agree with you. I feel like I have given digital comics a fair shot, but it's just not the medium. I think that collectors or comic book readers, are collectors by nature, and they aren't going to, like, you can't. I've been to your house and you have shown me a good portion of your collection, but you can't go to someone's house and pull out a tablet and start scrolling through a collection. Oh, here's my Amazing Fantasy 15. Like, you just can't do that. So
to me, it doesn't feel like you own. I like to own something. Even if it's a piece, if it's a comic book, I own that comic. I can hold it in my hand. You can't hold a digital comic in your hand. I mean, it's just data transferred, digitally.
right.
And I don't feel like I actually own the thing if it's only digital.
Another thing I noticed during the pandemic is there have always been crowd-funded comic books by independent creators, but it seems like there's been a real surge of them during the pandemic. I know Ethan Van Sciver, for example, and the title of his book escapes me, but he was able to crowdfund. I think that was it. That he crowdfunded that during the pandemic, and I think he did so pretty quickly.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I mean, Kickstarter and crowdfunding has become more and more popular as, creators want more share of their profits from their work and cut out the middleman, and fans are willing to do that for, purchasing promise of the product and a purchase of extras along with it. And, it is kind of a win-win situation. So it has become more and more popular, and, why it is that was particularly more prevalent during the pandemic, I'm not certain. I guess it just shows fans haven't given up on comics at that point.
I think fans were desperate for new content. And that kind of leads me to the next point I was going to make is a couple of retailers that I talked to have told me that when things return back to normal, they're going to focus more on trades and collected editions rather than floppies, because that is the product that has moved for them during the pandemic. And I wonder if that is a byproduct of, people like the comic book industry and specifically shops are built on a principle of new content is available every Wednesday. And when that new product doesn't come in, some of those back issues can sit in that shop for years.
Sure.
Even at deeply discounted prices. So a trade or a collected edition, somebody can go in and pull off the shelf and read an entire story or an entire run in one sitting. And I wonder if that is a trend where comic consumers were moving towards anyway, and the pandemic just exacerbated it, or if that's something that the pandemic kind of gave birth to.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I would say the rise of the graphic novel has been something that we've seen now for a few decades. It's certainly been more and more popular. You can walk into a bookstore and see graphic novels on the shelf now. You can the fans are more excited about. It's a way to get your product out there without the fan feeling trapped that they have to buy a book every single month on a continuous basis. Here you can just walk in, put down your money, you get a complete story in that one volume, and you're satisfied with it. So it's always been something that's been more and more popular. I would say, are the single issues going away? I don't think so. I mean, the shop I shop at still, even before the pandemic, was selling out of single issues on hot titles. and they buy a lot. I mean, they have a lot of volume there. So it just, there's still a lot of demand for single issues. But like you said, I mean, it's not every single issue. It's certain titles, you know,
Right.
so you can, the fact is, yes, there's more diversity than ever before in comics, and that's a good thing. But, you know, is the demand for single issues there, say on Dynamite titles, say on IDW titles? I mean, you know, IDW or Dynamite or some small company or independent company, they're not really small, puts out a new title. How many copies of that title does the comic book plan to sell? But if the latest Batman comes out, if the latest Spider-Man comes out, the shop probably will sell a bunch of those. And, you know, it's just a dynamic. So I don't think new comics are ever going to go away. I think the demand's still there for them. I think sellouts are still there on titles. Even, you know, right before the pandemic at the beginning of the year, Dark Horse put out a book, Bang #1. It sold out before it ever hit the shelves. I couldn't find it anywhere. I managed to find a copy on online store, and it was, I don't, by chance they had a first print. I think now that book's in its third print. You know, so you're still going to see demand there for individual titles, and it's just a personal preference. I mean, some fans prefer the singles, and some fans prefer the graphic novels. And especially during a pandemic with no new product coming out, if the store was able to stay open, probably the easiest thing for them to sell would have been a trade paperback, because you get a complete story in one, you know, one transaction.
So,
I mean, it could shift. I mean, you could see some kind of shift in the future. I don't know if you can trace it to the pandemic, but I would say, you know, some of these companies that might not move as many individual issues, maybe they forego putting out so many singles and put out more, and something goes straight to trade instead of singles. But I don't think you're ever going to see singles disappear completely. I think the demand's still there.
I think
After the pandemic, of course.
Right. I think the demand is still there. I think it will be interesting to see, because, like I said, the retailers that I talked to said they're going to shift their focus to trades, and they are in the business of identifying consumer trends. So
right.
I think it will be interesting to see if that observation holds up for them. I agree with you. I think that singles aren't going anywhere. You might see fewer of them produced, but I don't think they're going anywhere.
And I think you'd see it on a shop-by-shop basis. You would just see that if a shop notices their trades are selling out and they still got a lot of singles on the shelf, they might start ordering more trades because they're selling out and less singles, and vice versa. Some shop might be selling out of singles and not moving as many trades, so they put the focus in the singles. I think it probably depends on the shop and what the clientele of each shop is like.
So I want to circle back to something you said, and it was something I wanted to ask or talk about anyway. But you mentioned some of the independent creators, the smaller publishers like IDW and Dynamite and Boom. Obviously, Marvel and DC are going to be fine. They might be there might be a short-term effect, but in the long run, they're going to be fine. How do you think that some of the smaller publishers are going to be affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it depends. Wait to see exactly what effect it's going to have for not putting out product for so many months. Well, the question becomes: will fans have the money and the cash to support the comic books that they used to? I mean, that's really at the heart of it, because if they don't, the stores are going to be stuck with product they can't move. You can start ordering that stuff again, but are the fans going to come back to it? I mean, are the people able to pay all their bills and have enough for comics? And comics themselves were getting really expensive to begin with. Plus there was a glut of content out there that, unlike I've ever seen in my life as a lifelong comic book collector, every company was under pressure to put out more product than ever before, and there's a lot of great stuff out there, but can that model sustain itself after the pandemic? I would hope the companies cut down a bit in product, and I know, there's some talented creators out there that might not get the gig at some of those companies anymore, but like we mentioned, crowdfunding, they can fund their own comics these days. But as a fan, I think there just needed to really be more concerted effort to try to keep the industry from imploding on itself. And I think it was headed in an imploding manner. And it's amazing it hadn't imploded at this point with so much product out there. It's so much expensive product. Can IDW, can small companies come? How are they going to fare? I don't think anybody knows. I think it's just a wait and see. If that fan has enough money to buy their Marvels and DCs and some money left over for IDW and Dark Horse, or do they say, hey, I can only afford Batman, Spider-Man this week or this week, and I don't have money left over for the other titles? That's possible, and we're not going to know that it's going to take weeks to really figure that out, and that is something that stores are going to struggle with too, to find out what sells in this what we find ourselves in right now after everything shakes out.
I want to mention this too.
But on the flip side, though, just to point out, I mean, last week when I went to the comic store, because my comic shop had been selling the new DC titles that were coming in, and there were two people in front of me, and one person spent $300 on toys, and the next girl spent $100 on graphic novels. So there are people out there willing to buy. So, but it just depends. Some can still buy at those levels, and some can't.
Sure. Yeah. This is going to test, like you said, people's comic books are discretionary. They are, let's be honest, they are a non-essential item. And, with the economy where it's at right now and where it may be for the foreseeable future, comic books may be a discretionary thing for a lot of people that they just have to whittle out of their budget for the time being and just hope they can go back and pick up back issues later on that they missed or what have you.
Right. And I mean, I think DC and Marvel need to look hard at what they're putting out there. I mean, I believe I read too where I think it was it DC and Marvel both. I think there were some titles coming out that weren't big sellers that after the pandemic, they decided to, in the middle of the miniseries or whatever, they just decided to stop putting the floppies out there and turn it to digital only. I think Hawkeye maybe a couple others. And that's kind of strange. If a fan went out and spent money on a physical comic, are they going to finish it up digitally? That's kind of strange, but I think I remember seeing that somewhere.
So I want to throw this out there as part of the conversation as well, because I do think it is part of this conversation. And I think this is possibly more applicable to comic book movies rather than comic book TV shows. But with the pandemic, production on these shows and movies have either been paused or the movies that have been completed are on hold because movie theaters aren't open. So my question to you is, or the question I pose is, there's been talk of fatigue by comic book fans. Hey, I loved the MCU, but I'm kind of worn out and I'm ready for a breather. My personal opinion is that this pandemic will be a blessing in disguise because it has put a pause on all these and will let fans kind of start to get excited about these movies again. Black Widow's on hold, I think, until November. Wonder Woman's on hold until August. I believe The Eternals was scheduled for release later this year, and that might have been pushed back.
Right.
So I'm wondering, like I said, my opinion is this will be a blessing in disguise. This will allow people to kind of absorb in what some of the previous, films have offered, but give them a chance to digest that and get ready for another wave of them. But what do
Right,
you think?
I see what you're getting at. I mean, it's a case of there's never been more superhero movies, television, and auxiliary content outside of comics than ever before, and it did stand a chance of possible fan fatigue with so much of it. So now we don't see that fan fatigue because they have to wait longer for it. So does that longer wait mean they want the product more? So it's very possible. You talk about, look at the TV shows. I mean, they had Crisis on Infinite Earths. So much hype and so much excitement around translating that into television this year. People that might have never even watched the DC CW shows or maybe cared about them tuned in to see that event. And those shows weren't even able to finish their seasons the way they anticipated. They had to cut one or two episodes short, and they still worked, and they still had decent season finales that made fans excited for the future. And the same with the movies. I mean, I think the rumor out there was, does Black Widow go straight to Disney Plus and forego theaters, because there was a push out there for people to say, hey, let's get rid of theaters. And I'm glad that seems to have died down and seems to have not won out, because I'd hate for that to happen. I don't want just to sit at home and wait for something to come to TV. I'd rather go see it in a theater. So it's good to
You can't replicate the movie experience at home. You just
True.
can't. You can't have that level of surround sound. You can't have that big 70-foot screen, to replicate. Like, I would not have enjoyed, for example, the Marvel movies nearly as much if I'd seen them at home for the first time.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is a completely different experience.
But it's the same on the flip side. Sure, I love the heck out of the Netflix stuff, the Daredevils and Luke Cage and Iron Fist and Jessica Jones. But and I've loved the CW stuff too. But I mean, at the same time, the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe would have lost something had it skipped the theaters, in my opinion. And same for quality DC films too. I mean, Aquaman, Wonder Woman. I even like Justice League.
Do you think that the pandemic, and to your point about Justice League, do you think that the pandemic had any bearing on Zack Snyder released, or is going to release, his cut of Justice League that was just announced a few days ago? I personally don't think that the pandemic had any effect on that. I think he was waiting for the right moment, and the move with DC and Warner Brothers, the partnership with HBO, I think that opened up the door for him. It just so happened to be during the pandemic that the news was announced.
Yeah, I don't think you'd say the pandemic really influenced that. I would say overall the pandemic has made comic book fans and non-comic book fans alike stream more than ever before. So streaming is up more than it's ever been because of staying at home. So, with HBO Max coming out, which is going to be one of the biggest platforms ever created for streaming, it just stands to reason that something like Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League, which I understand fans have been clamoring for a very long time, I think the original cut of the film was fine. I liked it a lot, but I guess Zack Snyder had a lot of stuff he wanted to put in there that never made it in and got cut out. So it would be great to see, what it would have looked like with all that other material in there. And now HBO Max gives a platform to that to easily show it. Kind of the same strategy as the Donner cut, but the Donner cut for Superman, when that came out, streaming wasn't really big or didn't really take off, so that had to be DVD only. So I think, if it wasn't on streaming, I mean, this would have came out eventually somehow, probably.
I hope that there's no long-term negative effects on the comic book industry because of the pandemic. Like I had mentioned earlier, there's already been some shops that have closed, and I do hate that. I hate reading about a comic book shop that is closed, one that's been open for decades and just no choice but to shut their doors. But I'm hoping that for the ones that remain open, that they're able to thrive and survive, and hopefully we'll be back on track for Free Comic Book Day, which normally takes place the first Saturday in May. Right now it's been pushed back. I've heard rumors that they're going to try and have it the weekend prior to Halloween, but I don't think there's been anything official announced yet. But I'm hoping that we'll see a good bounce back. I know that Steve Jeppy from Diamond is trying to lead the charge on the bounce back movement, but we'll see. I mean, kind of like what you said, there's comic book fans whose choices where they spend their money may have to change for the time being.
Well, when you look at a comic book store, like you'd mentioned, a lot of those back issues that didn't sell the week they came out have been sitting in those shops for years. A lot of those might never sell. So, there's a lot of fans looking for back issues, and that's why they exist. But you can't expect a shop to only exist selling their back stock, because it's a tough sell in some cases, and that's why a lot of them end up reducing back stock and offer discounts and for people to peruse the back issues. So these shops were set up to mostly maximize sales of new content, and that was where the whole influx of customers came from every week. Was the majority were looking for the new books. So you cut that off for months, it's really tough, because it means if a store was able to sell anything at all, maybe mail order or whatever, I mean, they've been only selling back stock, which hadn't been moving to begin with and might never move, or trade paperbacks. So you've cut off their product for 2 months, and that's really tough on a store to pay bills, pay employees, keep the lights on. So obviously not every shop's going to survive, and the ones that do come back, it's going to be different. I mean, you're not going to see people spending as much on certain things, but at the same time, like I said, last week I was shocked in line that someone's dropping $300 on action figures, someone's dropping $100 on graphic novels, and comic shops are going to still be around. Comics are going to be here to stay. There's definitely going to be a change, and it's going to be hard to really guess what that change is while we're in the middle of this, or toward the end of this pandemic. It's going to be hard to figure it out until things are back to normal, and then you start seeing the trends, and then you start seeing what sells and what doesn't sell, and it's really going to be tough, I think, for comic shops for a while to figure that out.
All right, so I mean, I guess we can wrap this up unless you have something more that you want to throw out there.
It's pretty much everything I have on the topic. Like I said, I mean, I hope shops make a great comeback, a great bounce back. I hope if a shop had to close, I hope it finds a way to, reinvent itself, or a better way of making an income than it did before. I mean, it's tough, it's rough, but the industry's still going to be here, and the other part is to the creators. I mean, how are those creators going to? What effect has it had on them losing paychecks for a month or more?
Of course, yeah.
And comic book conventions, of course, still kind of up in the air. So it looks like some are still going to try to go on this year, and others have decided to throw in the towel. It's going to be an interesting thing to witness. I heard Tampa's going to happen. I believe SC Comic Con in Greenville still intends to go on in July. But, San Diego's closed down, and so it's going to be interesting to see what the next few months and the rest of the year really holds for the comic book industry.
I hope that you and I are able to, months from now, have another conversation, and we can talk specifically about, where the pandemic took the comic book industry. I think that'll be an interesting conversation to have in light of everything that's going on right now.
Absolutely.
My name is Jeff Wiley.
And I'm Tony Barletta.
Thank you for listening to us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.